Hello everyone, and welcome to Chapter 9 on meditation methods, practices and contemplations, or what you can practically do to progress in the dispensation of the Buddha in the context of the lecture series True Dhamma, following in the footsteps of the Buddha. My name is Dr. Florian Lau from the Dhamma Hub, and today we will dive into the depths of the meditation methods that are available to us, and I try to clear up some of the wrong views that are around and that people sadly fall for when they are beginners. Because in the beginning there is an overwhelming amount of available traditions and methods that a practitioner can do, and not all of them will be beneficial. But anyway, let us now come to a short overview over the content of this lecture. This is the second to last chapter, Chapter 9. After that we have only Chapter 10 left, which is full of personal examples and examples in general, so that you can get an idea of what you might do and what your progress might look like. But for now, we focus on the available methods. And first of all, I want to make very clear that modern methods are most of the time a replacement for what the Buddha taught as a virtue. So we have kind of ritualized the attainment of virtue. In principle, it is not really necessary to have methods to cultivate virtue or emotional non-reactivity. Nonetheless, it can help, because the task of trying to understand meditation or trying to practice a Dhamma can seem insurmountable to a beginner without proper instructions. And as of right now, there are very few skilled teachers around that can actually teach what the Buddha really taught. After that, we have a short story time, number 9, where we dive into the last days of the Buddha's dispensation, where he was very close to his parinibbana, or his final nibbana, shortly before his body died, let's put it like that. Then we have a few words on the optimal environment for meditation for beginners, and after that a few words or a few instructions when it comes to the right time of practicing methods. Then we have a short overview over several modern methods that are available to us, and in what way we can practice them so that they generate some benefit for us. Then we have a short section about how to properly reflect methods and how to know when it might be time to switch methods, or when it might be time to do something entirely different. After that, we have a short section on contemplations, which might be the main, let's call it, method that the Buddha taught. And after that, we go through a few other supportive practices and try to order all the available methods on a timeline for a practitioner that might just be beginning, so that they have a rough idea when they should do what to generate some benefit. And in the end, we do just a short summary and the typical stuff that I do at the outro of every video. But first, we have the entirely optional 5 minutes of mindfulness meditation to weaken your craving and thus to better understand what I present here in this lecture. You can pause the video now for 5 minutes and then resume and play the video later. Again, non-reactivity just means whenever there is an unwholesome impulse that is related to greed, aversion, or delusion that tries to force you to do something, where you feel an urge to do something, you simply let that urge endure in the mind and do not react out of it. That is all. That is what the training in emotional non-reactivity revolves around. And I will now pause for a moment and then we continue. Okay, but let us now dive into the content of the lecture. And as presented before, I want to start with methods as a replacement for virtue. And I want to make very clear what role methods or meditation methods, mechanical instructions can have in the modern practice. And first of all, methods can be helpful tools to cultivate virtue or other helpful mundane states, like calm or neutral emotions in general, that are kind of necessary for contemplating impermanence, as an example. And the Buddhist nun Ayakema, as an example, said that in the beginning, well, she said that methods are necessary. I would disagree with that. I would say that they are beneficial for a certain type of person. Not everyone needs methods at all. Some people can completely progress in the dispensation of the Buddha without any method. And there are quite a few examples of people who have attained the right view or stream entry just by contemplating and just by cultivating mindfulness, without any formal setting on the meditation cushion or anything like that. And in general, most methods that are available right now boil down to a training of non-reactivity. And that training of non-reactivity usually comes as a byproduct of weakening craving, simply because the meditation method is difficult to perform. And it's kinda uncomfortable in the beginning. And as long as that is the case, you have to endure some kind of bad feeling in meditation. And thus, you weaken your craving as a byproduct. But that weakening of craving as a byproduct can never generate any insight or understanding. Because to understand anything in the world, like how to add numbers in school or anything like that, or a new language, you have to make an effort at trying to understand that language or whatever you try to understand. And there is literally no difference when it comes to meditation or when it comes to generating insight in the context of Buddhism. That said, there are lots of different methods, and they have a lot of different looks and feels available to them. They have a lot of fluff that is actually not doing any work, that is just there due to tradition or any other aspect of the teacher that they emphasized as an example. And the Buddha called those things the sapwood or the bark of the holy life. So when someone went out to seek for hardwood, many methods just give you sapwood, or the bark, or the inner bark, or things like that. And most methods just have a very small or essential component that does all the work, that actually helps you progress on the meditative path or on the spiritual path. And this working component is almost always related to enduring some discomfort by generating indistractability of the mind. But that is virtue. Many teachers, for example, as Lee Brasington, call indistractability of the mind concentration, but the Buddha called it virtue, simply not acting out of emotional impulses to do something else. So when you try to stay with the breath, as an example, and be indistractable, not following your emotional impulses, your feeling-based impulses, your craving, means that you train yourself in virtue. That is not jhana, this is just virtue, at least according to the Buddha. You can still do the instructions of Lee Brasington and Ayakema without any harm, because virtue is very beneficial, as an example. They do not teach the absorbed style of meditation as I understand it. It was always very open when it comes to mindfulness. And personally, I see literally zero benefit in the absorption style of meditation, but some other people might disagree. But even monks like Thanissaro Bhikkhu, who teach in the Theravada tradition, which is very much influenced by the Visuddhimagga, often state that the absorbed style of meditation is a misinterpretation and is completely out of line with what the Buddha actually taught in the suttas. But yeah, pretty much all methods force you to endure bad feelings, because just sitting in the middle of the room or somewhere else where you are somewhat secluded creates some discomfort, because the mind is not used to it. And simply by doing that, you already train yourself in virtue. And that virtue means literally nothing else but learning to not follow your craving. You resist your craving, and that is virtue. And at the Buddha's time, all those methods, the multitude of methods that we have available right now, did not exist. The Buddha simply taught the monks how to meditate, and he always pretty much meant dwelling in jhana or contemplating when he taught that. He said, go to an empty hut and contemplate. Go to an empty hut and dwell in jhana. Do your jhana. But jhana requires a lot of insight before. So as a beginner, you cannot do your jhana. In essence, overall, you cannot really do jhana at all. It has to happen to you when the conditions are right. And the conditions have to be very right for jhana, because it requires a lot of prior training, a lot of gradual training beforehand. But yeah. And this is also very important, and a trap that many practitioners fall for. After a while, you become good at methods. And when you become very good at methods, then the difficulty of the method fades. And then you have to no longer endure, and your methods become quite enjoyable. And many people interpret that as a sign of progress. And in a sense, it is a sign of a certain kind of progress. But it will no longer yield the benefits of enduring and training in virtue, because you no longer have to endure and train yourself in virtue when you perform that method. So when you do methods to cultivate non-reactivity or indistractability or whatever you call it, then your method must be hard, so that there is something that you endure, so that there is some degree of frustration involved, that you gradually become better at, that you gradually can use to grow when it comes to your mental skills. And this is very important. But at that moment, when the method becomes too easy, there is no longer any benefit in it. And then you can just perform it to generate good feelings, which again is suddenly with the stream of the world and no longer against it. And Dhamma is always against the stream of the world, which is, again, very important. So you should not use your methods to cope, let's put it like that, which is a very important thing to do. When you just meditate to generate good feelings, then you are not really meditating according to the Buddha, because then you are meditating with greed, with hatred, and with delusion. And you should often reflect on why you use methods, because they can very easily backfire. Because the moment we use meditation methods to generate good feelings, that moment we are no longer practicing in line with the Dhamma. When we have not yet attained the right view, then we are completely against the Dhamma. And when we already have attained the right view, then we are stagnating. Let's put it like that. But let us continue. Again, modern methods are a replacement for the classical virtue. And the fact that we are using methods nowadays is likely very much due to the practitioner's impatience. Because in the past, as I understand it from the suttas and from the representations there, people were more advanced per default many times. And thus they could just sit in meditation and contemplate and do all the things and dwell in jhana. But as of right now, most people do not possess the necessary preconditions to just enter any jhanic state. Because right now, many people are very much deep down the sensuality rabbit hole. So we are completely dependent on external pleasures through the senses that we generate through the internet, through watching series, through eating tasty foods and all those things. And now we want to meditate like real monks. Yet we cannot simply do that. It is kinda impossible to meditate like that, simply because we do not fulfill the necessary preconditions. Nonetheless, as we want that, we tend to emulate that state and just sit down and do something that externally looks like dwelling in the jhana, as an example. But whatever we do, it can at best generate a temporary kind of virtue, a temporary absence of unwholesome states, but not freedom from it. Freedom from those unwholesome states can only happen through understanding. And understanding is a completely different domain when it comes to meditation methods. Meditation methods are mechanical. They are always something that you do. But when the Buddha talked about meditation, it is always something that happens to you. And there is a crucial difference that can only really be understood by people who have at least attained the right view. Because from that moment onward, you know what non-self actually means in your experience and not just as a theoretical concept in your mind. And it's very important to keep that in mind. This very important point where the practice of virtue becomes as a practice of Dhamma, because you have had the necessary insight. And the methods can only manage suffering, but never uproot it, while Dhamma can uproot suffering by removing the necessary conditions for suffering to arise. And it's very popular to mix those two things up, because in essence, the practice does not change much. The only thing that changes is the right view, and that changes everything. But overall, beginners tend to feel lost without methods because they have no idea what to do. In general, it is a good practice to enter a doubt, but overall, people are not ready for that nowadays. So we have to gradually introduce them to the more vague seeming methods that the Buddha used for people to make great progress on the spiritual path. So methods do have some benefit, simply because the general or average preconditions are very, let's put it, bad in comparison to the time of the Buddha. And overall, the insurmountable seeming task of spirituality becomes a lot more manageable when you have some tangible methods available in the beginning. But there is always a time when you must leave your methods behind, because when you rely on methods all the time, then you cannot make a breakthrough to the Dhamma, because the Dhamma is beyond doing. It is not something you do. And only based on the insight, namely the right view, can you actually know what that beyond doing actually means. So you must know the limitations of methods and do not use them to blindly generate pleasures. Dhamma is beyond pleasure. Pleasure is not the metric you should use to assess your progress. You can feel as nice as you want during your meditation. That does not mean that you progress the slightest in the dispensation of the Buddha. So at the time of the Buddha, virtue was enough. and it was timely. Nowadays, virtue would still be enough, but it's not timely and modern anymore. At the time of the Buddha, people had to work like 16 hours in the field to generate some food to eat. So that was the optimal method for them to generate some emotional non-reactivity, because you can train virtue all the time. Nowadays, we don't have to work all the time anymore. And now we can actually cultivate virtue in different ways. That does not mean that it's better or worse than before, but at least it's only temporary. We don't do it all the time anymore. Nowadays, we just do it some parts of the time. But overall, one of the very early steps in the gradual training was always virtue, and virtue is not Dhamma. So in the beginning, you take the 5 precepts as your initial training and stopped acting out of the most gross kinds of impulses in body, speech, and mind. And you reflect often on your actions in body, speech, and mind and try to find out if they are wholesome or unwholesome. And the difference is in your intentions. The difference is in the presence of craving or no presence of craving. And that is something that you must understand when you try to practice Dhamma. At some point, you must understand in your experience what it is that makes certain actions wholesome or unwholesome. So a lot of the prior training, or a lot of the initial training in Buddhism, is about generating that insight. And you want to generalize from all the examples that are available to you if something is unwholesome or if something is wholesome. If something leads to good results for you or others or both, or if something leads to bad results for you or others or both. And virtue overall was the classic and likely the best way to generate emotional non-reactivity. And if the practice seems too overwhelming without methods, you can use them, but you should use them rightly. And over time, you can gradually wean yourself off the method and practice more in line with what the suttas actually said. Okay, but now that we have a general idea and a word of warning and a small disclaimer, let's put it like that, on virtue and on methods, we come to a short story time, namely story time number 9, where we talk about the travel with Ananda and the last year in the life of the Buddha. And as the title said, the Buddha did pretty much nothing else but travel with Ananda from location to location, from city to city, to give certain talks. And during that time, the Buddha mainly gave one talk that he repeated over and over again to new practitioners. And he hinted many times that he was about to decide to attain final Nibbana, that he relinquished the life principle, and he needed convincing to continue. And Ananda was too absorbed with his mind in greed, hatred, and delusion, and the 3 poisons, to notice that was going on. And as a result, he, for like 15 times, did not notice. And then the Buddha made his decision, okay, it is time to relinquish the life principle. I have taught enough. I laid down the Dhamma sufficiently and decided to pretty much die and to attain Parinibbana. But yeah, Ananda was too absorbed to notice that. At the time, he was only a stream enterer, and he had a tendency to focus on other things. I'm very thankful that he and his great memory were there at the time to record all the discourses that the Buddha gave on Dhamma. But still, he had some weaknesses of character. He was at least at the time, he was a person who was easy to distract. And he was criticized by his fellow practitioners in the holy life, like Mahakassapa, frequently for that. And the talks that the Buddha gave are pretty much like the following. Such is virtue, such is concentration, such is understanding. Concentration fortified with virtue brings great benefit and great fruit. Understanding fortified with concentration brings great benefit and great fruit. The heart fortified with understanding becomes completely liberated from the taint of sensual desire, from the taint of being, from the taint of views, and from the taint of ignorance. So this is a very concise summary of the entirety of the Buddhist path. And this is always very important to keep in mind. The Buddha, most of the time, gave a complete overview over the complete practice from the very beginning to the attainment of final Nibbana when he gave a talk. Because many people, again, only heard one talk ever by the Buddha. And that had to be sufficient to actually attain the final goal, which is very important to keep in mind. And then came the time of the Parinibbana, when the Buddha actually started to relinquish the life principle. And the Buddha called the Sangha at that time empty after the chief disciples, namely Sariputta and Moggallana, died. And the Buddha called himself he compared his body with an old cart which is just held together by leather straps, because he went through a lot of torture during his striving for full liberation of mind, and that obviously took a toll on his body. He was, as an example, frequently plagued by very strong back aches. Well, he was enlightened, so it was not too bad for him, but his body had to be taken care of, even if he did not suffer from it. So he had to rest frequently and had to give other monks, other disciples, the opportunity to give talks to the Sangha of Bhikkhus. And then he decided to relinquish the life principle after Ananda failed to convince him otherwise, and teach for the rest of the lifetimes that he had theoretically left. And to actually attain final Nibbana, he decided to eat corrupted meat in a small town, and his last alms food was provided to him by a blacksmith named Kunda. And the Buddha made very sure that there is a lot of merit in giving the Buddha his last meal, so that the people would not rebel against the offering of the blacksmith of the corrupted meat. But yeah, his last words on the dying bed were, "Indeed, monks, I declare to you this. It is in the nature of all formations to dissolve. Attain perfection through diligence." Those were more or less his last words. So what he said there is, everything that has a nature of arising also has a nature of ceasing. So whatever comes into being, because of that very fact of coming into being, those things will dissolve. Those things are impermanent, which is the understanding of the Sotapanna, of a stream enterer. And then he said that you should attain perfection through diligence. Other translations translate that as strive on restlessly, which is also a very good translation. And when you read such statements, it is in a very stark contrast to many other traditions that say there is nothing to attain. There is nothing to do. There is nothing, some samsara and nibbana are the same, or whatever. Those statements are in stark contrast to what the Buddha actually said. The Buddha always said that we should be ardent, alert, that we should practice, that there should be manly effort involved, and all those things, because the spiritual path can be a hard one, and you have to strive to reach the final goal. Otherwise, it will not happen. It will only happen when the right preconditions are there, and diligence and practice and striving and effort are necessary preconditions. So when someone tries to convince you that you should do nothing, that might be true for them when they are beyond training already. But all the things that they did to get where they are now are very relevant to you if you are not yet there. And this is very important to keep in mind. And on the deathbed, the Buddha progressed through many jhanas before the bed and even taught one last disciple. And in the end, there was a big celebration in the honor of the Buddha. And they created a huge stupa to honor the dead body of the Buddha, and then they cremated his body, and I think his remains were distributed among the big kingdoms at that time, and he did die in a small town, so that people would not fight over the remainings of his body. But yeah, this is how the Buddha attained Parinibbana, final Nibbana, the place of no return, let's put it like that. So this happened in the 80th year of the Buddha's life, after about 45 years of teaching. He went forth from the home life into homelessness at the age of 29, attained liberation at the age of 35, and died at the age of 80 in a small town. And there was a very long party going on to honor the Buddha. And supposedly his body was not subject to decay at that time. But yeah, that should be enough for the story time. Now we come to the proper environment when it comes to meditation, which is again not what you might think of. It is not necessary to, for example, sit in a cave in a very secluded land in a place where no one can go. Those environments are still good, so there's no problem with sitting in a cave. But it is not necessary. When the Buddha said that monks should practice, he pretty much always said that a monk should go into the forest to sit under on the roots of a tree, or to look for an empty hut. This is all that is usually necessary. So you should not try to perfect your physical surroundings, but you should make sure that they are good enough and fulfill the necessary preconditions for spiritual striving. And in the beginning, as a very beginner, we need laboratory conditions, especially our generation, our internet generations, that has a very short attention span. They need even more specific conditions to even start practicing on the path, because they are too easily distracted. And even though it might not seem to be very environmental to most people, but it can help to close your eyes in meditation, because the visual sense is the strongest in humans. So when you close your eyes, then about 80% of the distractions are already gone. Your eyes will go all over the place when they are opened, and that can be a problem for beginners. Overall, there's no problem when it comes to meditation with open eyes. In fact, you can even argue that it is better. But it is a very tiny contribution. So in the end, it does not really matter if you open your eyes or close your eyes. But yeah. And then you should make sure that you, at least as a beginner, and this is very mundane advice when it comes to meditation. This is just about habit building. This is nothing that the Buddha really taught like that. I still want to make sure that you have an easy time to actually creating a habit out of meditation, as I did so in the beginning too. And habit building works very well and actually ensures that you do practice. So it is a good thing to choose the same place and the same time every time you meditate, because our mind works based on habits. It tries to do more of the same every time it does something. And the longer you do something, the more deeply ingrained it becomes, and the mind regards it as something that is necessary for our survival. And from that moment onwards, it becomes effortless. And when meditation is effortless, then it's a very good thing. It's like lifting weights or doing other forms of exercise. It's not necessarily something that is pleasant. Quite the contrary. It is quite difficult. It's quite exhausting. You feel depleted afterwards, and you might even have some delayed onset muscle soreness. So some seriously hurting muscles. But nonetheless, it is good for you. And when you make a habit out of it, then it becomes effortless, and you even look forward to lifting weights. And once your meditation habit reaches such a state, it's very beneficial for you. Let's put it like that. And then you should make sure that you are somewhat comfortable and secluded. And seclusion is quite necessary. You want to be secluded in many different ways. First of all, you want to be secluded from sensual pleasures. So you must turn off your monitor, your TV, your music, your pets must be somewhere else, and everything like that. You must be secluded from all those things physically. And then you must also be socially secluded. You do not want to be interrupted by people all the time. Dhamma is always something that you practice alone. You must understand it for yourself. You must understand it on your own. And other people have a very strong sensual pull on us. So when there is another person in the room, we behave very different from how we would behave if we were alone. This is very important to keep in mind. Other people make us react, and thus it is very difficult to meditate in a group, which is why there is legit criticism when it comes to the retreat style of practice, where you sit in a huge room with lots of people, because they make you react. Unless you are a very advanced practitioner already, you will meditate differently as if you were meditating alone. And we will have a short exercise to understand what I mean in a few slides, I think. So you want to be comfortable, but not too comfortable. You want to sit in the least distracting posture, in the sitting posture, if you can. Otherwise, all the other postures are also fine, but sitting is optimal for beginners. And you want to sit upright and alert, and not in a posture that promotes sleepiness. Because when you close your eyes, then it's very easy to fall asleep, especially as a beginner, because the mind associates the closed eyes with sleeping, and then you will become drowsy and hindered in many ways. So if you at least make sure that your body posture promotes alertness and awakeness, then you have a much easier time. And again, you should try to avoid all strong sensual inputs, all strong smells in the background, sounds, images, because they induce craving. And the nature of all things can only really be understood when there is no craving. So you should, by all means, try to cultivate some calm, some level of seclusion from all those things that hinder your understanding. Again, which is very important. Otherwise, understanding cannot really take place. You cannot understand in the presence of craving. When there is craving, there is no understanding. It's as simple as that. You will misconceive through your craving, and it's like trying to understand science while you are biased. Then you will just reject information that you do not like. And this is not the way to go about things. When you just want to prove what you know already and want to be right, then you will not make any progress. Because the Dhamma is against the grain. It will not sound very appealing to you in the beginning, because it goes against your entire existence. So you must have very specific conditions to attain the sublime peace that the Buddha was talking about. And now we have a few words on the physical and social aspects. So in the beginning, you should take care of your bodily and mental needs. You should sleep well and meditate not too early after getting up and not too late before bed, because you will be sleepy and drowsy. And you should also not meditate after eating a big meal in the afternoon, as an example. At least I am super drowsy when I meditate at, 2 p.m. after I have just eaten. And that is not a good precondition for meditation, at least in the beginning. And you should neither eat too much nor too little food. So in a sense, you want to make sure that you are in a state of awakeness and alertness. And you should by all means avoid any type of video games, any type of political discussion, any type of discussion overall or disagreement with other people before meditation. Because those things make you freakishly reactive. And then you have a mind that is full of craving. You should avoid arguments and any kind of triggering environment. That does not mean that you try to avoid the problem. It just means that for the time you set those things aside so that you can work on them by training virtue and gaining independence of those external conditions. But in the beginning, you should make sure that the conditions are good. Further, you should be neither too energetic nor too depleted. So you should be in a very balanced state of mind where there are few desires and needs that could distract you. And you should also be secluded from the possibility to socialize. So it should not even be possible in the very near future to talk to another person. It's fine if you sit in your room, in your apartment, but if you have the wife and the children in the next room, then it's not the same. And you should, and this is also very important, meet and meditate in a group once in a while. This is not so much about the group meditation aspects, which can also be nice, because then you learn about the cravings that are involved in group situations, at least if you are somewhat advanced. The point of this is more or less that you want to be discussing the Dhamma with other people who are possibly even more advanced than you, so that you can ask your questions to them. And you could even argue that a teacher in person is quite necessary for progress when it comes to the Dhamma. And the goal is very much to have the need for less specific conditions over time. So in the beginning, you need very specific conditions to actually maintain your mindfulness and all those things. And the more virtuous you become, the less specific do the external conditions need to be. And this is the goal. We want to be completely independent of the external circumstances after a time. And now to the short exercise to show you why seclusion is so necessary. And again, whenever I present you an exercise, the first block is what we do first, and the second block should be done after some contemplation on the question or the scenario that I present to you. And this time around, I want to convince you of the benefits and the difference that seclusion makes. Suppose you were going on a hike all on your own into the wilderness, like where there are very much dangerous animals, where there is heat and cold and hunger, and no one to talk to. You have nothing but basic provisions with you. And now compare it with a situation where you do the same hike in a group of 5 people who are well prepared. And now ponder on that a little bit and think about if there is any significant difference in the look and feel that you can just imagine. If you do it yourself, it's a very different thing again. But just ponder a bit. Okay, I will assume that you are now done. And yeah, there would be a lot less pressure and fear when you go with other people, and your mind would be a lot less mindful of the danger or of boredom or of any other thing. Some seclusion is very much necessary on the path. Dhamma has to be understood alone. And the pressure that you feel when you are alone is very helpful when it comes to progress on the path, because the preconditions or the external conditions that you create very much show you where there is still craving left in you, because danger induces craving, discomfort induces craving, being alone, secluded from the possibility to talk to other people, induces craving, and craving always means suffering. Thus you create conditions that make you suffer to a degree just to give your mind, an immediate problem to work on. And when there is an immediate problem to work on, the mind will start working on that problem with much more vigor. It will try much harder to solve that problem. And when you already have the right view, this solving of the problem means uprooting craving. So a person who already has the right view can go in seclusion and profit greatly from that. A person who has not yet attained the right view can also go in seclusion, but it has to be the right balance. So that person can, also suffer problems from being in seclusion all the time. So that person actually needs instruction, needs discussion, needs clearing up of perplexing points. So that cannot be done alone, really. So that person at least has to go to other people who are more advanced from time to time. But anyway, let us continue now. Now to a few constraints on the time for beginners. And this depends a lot on the method and the progress of the beginner. So as a beginner, 20 minutes of meditation are a very, very good goal. And this might even apply to the first year or the first year and a half. And you can also think about splitting those times or those time intervals up. You can have it in one setting or in many settings. And it, again, depends a lot on what you try to achieve with the meditation. But for the purpose of habit building, 1 minute each day is absolutely necessary. You want to at least master the willpower, master the strength, the effort to do 1 minute of meditation each day. That is really not too much. And once you are already sitting, then the mind is inclined to do more, because the initial hurdle to actually start your new habit is gone. And you want to work towards 60 minutes of sitting on the meditation cushion. From that moment onward, there's not too much additional benefit when it comes to enduring the sitting of the meditation, especially when there are no good feelings. When there are good feelings involved, then you have motivation to sit, and then there is a craving involved, and then you should really ponder if it is good for you to continue sitting. But yeah, you want to have a lot of consistency, and this consistency is much better than a short sprint of a lot of work. You cannot sprint your way out of samsara. It's not heroic effort for 2 weeks. It is consistent and persistent effort over years of practice that get you out of samsara, that weaken your craving sufficiently, and at some point even uproot your craving. And yeah, it's best to raise the base level and do more if you feel good. So you want to gradually increase the time that you sit very slowly, so that the mind does not start rebelling against that idea of meditation. And if you feel good, then you do just a bit more. And if you do 45 to 120 minutes of meditation each day, then you have a good chance of actually progressing well in the spiritual, in the holy life, as the Buddha put it. And a good starting scheme that I like to advise for beginners who have no real interest because they had not yet had a Divine Messenger event is 1 day of 1 minute meditation, 2 days of 2 minutes, 3 days of 3 minutes, 4 days of 4 minutes, and so on. So after a time, you will have a serious meditation habit, and the mind does not rebel too much against that scheme, because it has a lot of time to adapt to the additional meditation time each day. And this is very important now. It does not really matter how much time you invest in the end. What matters is that your wish to escape samsara and understand the Dhamma has to be more important to you than everything else. Because everything else goes against the Dhamma, directly against the Dhamma. If you want to, for example, be sober, then being sober has to be more important to you than being drunk. Otherwise, you cannot become sober. And the same is also true for the Dhamma. Everything about sensuality goes directly against the Dhamma. And when you want to practice Dhamma, Dhamma has to be at least more important than everything else. Otherwise, there is no true progress, and the attainment of right view is basically impossible. Okay, but now we come to an overview and dive into a lot of modern methods. And the modern methods are a bit different than the ancient methods. The Buddha, again, mainly taught virtue, and contemplations and discussions and self-interrogations were also common. Overall, he advised his followers to contemplate about 40 different topics or subjects, or around the range of 40 different ones. And they all presuppose emotional non-reactivity, and in many cases, they also presuppose the right view. So if you do not have the right view, most of those methods are completely off the charts for you. You cannot profit from them because you cannot perform them, because they are based on the right view. So when the Buddha says or asks a monk if he sees all sankharas as impermanent, or if he sees that the eye is impermanent, and you cannot see that, then that method is not of benefit for you, because you do not fulfill the necessary condition. If you, however, see that the eye is impermanent, that the ear is impermanent, and all those things, then his method will likely apply to you. So yeah, you have to make sure that you actually fulfill the necessary preconditions for a certain type of training. And if you can't do classical virtue, choose a method that fits your problem that you are trying to overcome right now and your character. For example, if you are a very agitated person, then you want to have a method that cultivates calm, which is perfectly fine, by the way. If you are a very restless person, then that is not a good condition for practicing the Dhamma. Practicing the Dhamma requires neutral feelings. And when you are restless all the time, then you have to solve that problem first. But you should not mistake that with the practice of Dhamma. This is a practice to cultivate calm, which is perfectly fine. Again, many people need calm in their lives because their lives are freakishly restless. So you have to make sure that that problem has to be taken care of first, and then you can switch to the next thing. And it's a good idea to make notes and honestly reflect what works and what does not work. And you have to choose a method for at least one sitting and do not switch all the time. And you have to try it for a few weeks to see if there is any benefit to that. And oftentimes there is an initial surge of mindfulness simply due to novelty and simply due to doing things more right than before. But it will wear off after a time, and then the method will do nothing for you anymore. And then you have to switch to the next thing that feels good again. Again, this is completely besides the point of Dhamma. You want to be at ease when faced with difficulty and not avoid difficulty. This is the overarching theme of Dhamma. You don't want to manage your discomfort, you want to be beyond your discomfort. You want to be high above and detached even when there is discomfort. So if you want a wholesome method, it must always weaken your craving to some degree, and that requires some difficulty. So when your method is just pleasure, just enjoyment, and there is no difficulty in it, then it is very likely that it will be not helping you to progress on the path that the Buddha laid out. But now we come to the method. Let's call it method because I have no better word, or the technique or subject that the Buddha was most fond of and which is most popular nowadays. And it has been praised a lot by the Buddha, but not as a method to generate absorption. This is a misinterpretation. The Buddha did praise the breath a lot, and he taught it as to be extremely beneficial to almost all practitioners. And there's a very important reason for that, because the breath is always available. Without the breath, you cannot live. So it is a very stable point of reference, and it is an intentional act. And to understand sankharas, to understand the self, to understand the Dhamma, you must work with intentional actions, things that you feel like doing. And only on the basis of that can you actually understand the Dhamma. For that reason, for example, is the heartbeat a very bad object or subject of meditation, because it's not very intentional. You cannot control your heartbeat and make it stop for a time. It is just doing its thing. So it's not an intentional act and thereby a bad object of meditation. And further, the breath is completely necessary for living, and it is thus suitable for developing an understanding of dependent origination. Because you have to, or can, notice, based on the breath, based on the mindfulness of the breathing, that everything you do depends on the breath, as an example. And everything that is intentional can serve as a foundation for understanding dependent origination. And there are lots of modern objects of meditation. This is the part that deviates a lot from what the Buddha taught, because he never taught mindfulness of breathing with any of those objects. He did not say that you should observe the tip of your nostrils or your upper lip, or the rising and falling of the abdomen, or that you should know your breath. Anything of that, the last part might be closest to what the Buddha actually taught. But the other things are the most popular objects of meditation that are out there. And they can have their use as a calming technique. And again, there is nothing wrong with calming techniques, but they are not Dhamma. And they won't get you closer to Dhamma. There is no magic about those objects of meditation, but they calm you. And we will now analyze the breathing methods that calm you. They won't generate insight, very important. But if you have a trouble or problems with being not calm enough, then those methods can help you a lot. Because calm is necessary. Neutral emotions are necessary. And yeah, those breathing methods are usually to develop calm and not insight. And what you should first do is to seek out a quiet and undisturbed place. But don't be too neurotic about it. Good enough is good enough. Sit upright, stable, yet comfortable on a meditation cushion or chair. If you cannot sit, lie down. It's also fine. It doesn't matter too much. But the best posture is obviously sitting, because it is least distracting and least associated with other acts, like sleeping or anything like that. Then you should make sure that you relax all the muscles in your body that are typically very tense, like the shoulders, the face, the stomach is typically flexed. The muscles around the eyes are also typically very tense. The neck is tense. And yeah, again, this is for cultivating calm and not for cultivating insight. then you should stick out your chest and straighten your spine and choose a posture that promotes alertness and awakeness. And then you can close your eyes or focus on nothing in particular. Open eyes and no focus is also fine. The goal is to not be distracted by anything. You can breathe into your stomach, as again, that promotes calm and weakens anxiety. And the chest breathing is very active, very shallow, and promotes anxiety in comparison. So you should make sure that you don't do that. In general, it's a good idea to breathe into the stomach or the abdomen and not into the chest. That's not just for meditation, by the way. It's always beneficial. Chest breathing is not advisable. And then you could take 3 deep breaths to prime your mind for the act of meditation. So if you always take 3 deep breaths, then the mind already knows what to expect, and then it has an easier time to sink into the calming technique. And then you want to focus on your object or anchor point. If you, for example, choose the rim of your nostrils, then you can feel the air flowing in and out of the nose. And that has a calming effect on us. And if you want to make it more right and more in line with what the Buddha taught, then you should start to endure distractions and let them be there. Do not try to remove them from your experience. That is impossible. They are already there, and you cannot remove them. The best you can do is to endure their pulling and pushing. This is a state that you want to achieve. There is always a background, and it is even necessary to be there to understand anything. There must be a foreground and a background. Only on the basis of that can you understand that the foreground completely depends on the background in which you have no say. So you do not want to get absorbed in one thing, because that really makes insight impossible to occur. And then you want to endure all the sensual pulls and pushes. If there is something nice going on in a chain of thought, you want to endure and restrain yourself. And in doing so, you become mentally stronger and train yourself in virtue already, while doing a classical seeming meditation method. You get some carryover into the actual things that the Buddha was teaching. And whenever there is something coming up in your mind that has the prospect of more pleasure, like a fantasy, some sexual fantasy even that is coming up, or some heroic act that you imagine in your mind, you don't want to welcome it or entertain that thought or engage with it. You just let it be there and practice non-aversion towards it. This is a state that you want to achieve, non-aversion or equanimity. This is what meditation is all about. And in the state of equanimity, when there is no craving, or very little craving, then you can actually understand. It is all about reducing your craving. And in the beginning, it literally does not matter what kind of method you use, because your mind is so untrained that you will benefit from literally everything. So breath meditation is just as good as everything else. And you don't have to judge yourself if you fail at first, because we will fail. We all have no idea what we are doing in the beginning, and it's perfectly fine and normal like that. There's a reason why the Buddha called it a gradual training, and not something that you should be instantly good at. You won't be. Training something to become good at it is hard work, and it requires a lot of repetition of things. So be gentle with yourself. Apply gentle effort, but stay persistent. You must do it, and there must be a tendency to do more and get better at it. If there is no such thing, then there is a problem. So there are also a lot of benefits when it comes to breathing meditation. First of all, as I have already said, it trains you in non-reactivity by carryover, simply because you have to restrain yourself and you have to endure to properly perform the method. There will be some carryover into general virtue and into general restraint. It cultivates also mindfulness of the background if you do it right, namely if you allow all those other things to be there and you don't try to ignore them. So at some point there will be some background accessible to you, and the concept of foreground and background, or attention and what is also there, will be very clear to you. And it is very suitable for developing insight into non-self, as it is an intentional act. And you can notice that that intentional act depends on things that are outside of your control, fully. And thus you can develop insight based on that. And it also trains letting emotions endure in the mind. And this is completely necessary, because in the end, you want to understand craving. This is a penetration of the Four Noble Truths. The understanding of craving as a source of suffering, and ignorance as a source of suffering. But to understand craving, you have to let bad feelings and emotions endure in the mind. And then you can understand them while they are there. You cannot understand them when they are not there. It's as simple as that. And then you want to let them go, let them be, or even let them come. Let the emotions do whatever they wish. You do not interact with them. And breathing meditation is suitable for letting those things happen. And you can slowly rewire that method to the contemplative style of meditation that the Buddha greatly praised and greatly advised. There's a lot of benefit in doing that. Okay, but let us continue with another style of meditation. And this is a labeling and noting style of meditation as taught by Mahasi Sayadaw. This is a style that originated in Burma, and initially it was taught to people who had a lot of trouble concentrating. Later, Mahasi Sayadaw was greatly opposed to all the jhana meditations and to the absorption techniques, as he has noticed that all the absorption stuff was not what the Buddha taught. And then he went another direction that was more suitable for progress. That does not mean that the method Mahasi Sayadaw came up with is the one and only method. It can help, but in itself, it is just another thing that you can do as a basis for generating insight. There is no magic about labeling or noting. But what it does is, or what you do there is, that you find a designation or a word for whatever is going on in the mind. So when there is thinking going on, you repeat in your mind, or repeat out loud, thinking. Just give it a label, and that already creates a bit of distance between the thing that is going on and yourself. That can initially help a great deal to separate yourself from whatever is going on. The self will just find a new place to establish itself, so it will not give you a lot of insight, but it can open the door, give you a taste of what is possible. And all those things are also, all those acts of labeling or noting are also small experiments that greatly give you some degree of accountability. Whenever you label something, you will notice that the label is very often not matching what is actually going on, and you have just fallen into some degree of automaticity. And you want to notice that and then try harder next time. And it has similar benefits to breathing meditation, and it can especially help to speak out the labels aloud if you are in a very unconcentrated or agitated state. If you are already calmer, you mentally label, and if you are very, very calm, you just want to know what is going on without even using your mental voice, which is again very important. And practically speaking, you do the setup pretty much like a normal breathing meditation, and initially you always start with speaking your labels. We always want to use a gradual approach to pretty much all methods that we ever use. It's always a gradual approach. We want to ease into any method of concentration or any method of calming. The mind will rebel against big jumps. It always has to be gradual. There's a reason why the Buddha emphasized the gradual nature of his training. And then, whatever happens in your mind, for example, when I'm speaking right now, then I could say speaking out loud, or thinking, or feeling, or aversion, or annoyance, or whatever is going on. You can just label it and thus generate some distance between the phenomena and your appropriation. You want to notice that those two things are not the same. And your own voice has a calming effect. And you really want to label like clockwork. With each breath, or with each in and out breath cycle, there should be one label. So each 4 seconds, one label, one label, one label. And this is good for people with a very low attention span. So you give the mind a task that is very similar to the natural mode of being. And thus you can generate some indestructibility of the mind, simply by telling the mind to do what it always does. So you can get concentrated by doing that, and the mind will calm down, and the pulling and pushing sensations on your attention will calm down too. And you should use the first word that comes to mind and not just think and ponder what would be the best word. Just spout out something. It doesn't really matter what the label is. What matters is that you designate it with something. That word does not really matter too much. And you should try to introduce new labels from time to time, and you should repeat the entire process until you are very calm. This is the entire idea behind that method. Let's look what is next. Next would be walking meditation, but I think that is enough for today. So this style of meditation is especially suitable for people with a very low attention span. But again, it is only for the first few months maybe of meditation. After that you should switch. After that it will become a cope. It will be something that generates nice feelings for you. And then the benefits of enduring and restraint and all the other carryover into virtue will not be there anymore. And this is what is necessary. It can still be used as a calming technique, but you should not use it as a cope, not as a management technique for suffering. We want to not cope. We want to be able to not suffer when there are circumstances that made us suffer in the past. The mind has to find a way to not suffer while there are things that make us suffer. It might sound like a catch-22, but it is possible to unconditionally not suffer by removing the self part from all sankharas. Okay, but I think that is enough for today when it comes to the content. We will do the rest of the chapter next time. Okay, if you have any questions concerning the content of this video, and by all means, I would expect that there are some questions, especially concerning people who do practice lots of methods and expect liberation from just the mechanical approach to meditation. This is not going to happen, and if you have any perplexity concerning anything that I have presented here today, by all means, start a new comment thread on YouTube and post your question there so that YouTube informs me about your question. And then based on that, I can find an answer and add your question to the questions and answer video in the end of the lecture so that other people can benefit from your question too. But yeah, apart from that, I think that is sufficient for today. If you know anyone who would profit from such a lecture, feel free to recommend this lecture series to them so that they might benefit from some good Dhamma that is in line with what the Buddha actually taught. But yeah, until then, thank you very much for your attention and thank you very much for watching the video till the end. Feel free to leave a like and a comment or whatever, and maybe see you again next time, and goodbye.